Hello everyone, it's Lennon. Welcome to the channel. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about channeled messages and what I believe about them. Okay? Ever since I was a child, I've gotten visions, if you will. And I guess I've always assumed that they were vivid daydreams, right? And I've kind of been led in my adult years to feel that they're probably more active imagination. But not always, because active imagination implies that you put in some kind of effort to allow the imagination to unfurl. But these visions, they come from nowhere. And they act as these, like all of a sudden, outside of this meditative state that you might be in, I would get these vivid, stories playing out in my mind, and a lot of times they would be so symbolic and allegorical that they would be downright confusing, right? And it would very much be like I was dreaming during the day, like a REM cycle thing would be happening inside the brain. Okay, and like I said, this has happened to me ever since I was a child. And like I said, they seem to come inside meditative states. So I'll be in the car on a long car ride in the passenger seat, and if I don't have anything to distract me, like a book or something I'm listening to or something like that, and I'm just staring out the window, and after a little while, my brain starts to do its own thing, and I'll get those vivid channeled messages and daydreams and messages, if you will, from wherever, these mythopoetic stories unfurling in my mind, right? I could be doing dishes, I could be doing laundry, I could be painting or drawing. It seems to really happen in the times where my brain is pretty blanked out. And so, that's usually when they happen for me. And then the question I sometimes ask myself, because after I put out Immaculate Immortality, which are my channeled messages from the divine, so many of those poems themselves they came in those vivid daydreams. They came inside of meditative ritual mindset. They came through in waves. And when I put it out, I had a certain doubt, right? And I said, how would I know if this was the dark feminine messaging me, or if this was just a form of my imagination that's always been prevalent? And I didn't really know how to answer that question, but I'm probably going to blow the lid off this right now. Who cares? Inside this psychic realization, I had pondered on the relevancy of the messages, the relevancy of the epithets, because every single poem that I wrote for that book, it was like 200 and something, every single one of them's title is an epithet for one of the faces of the dark feminine, right? And again, so I doubted myself. I said, well, how could these possibly be channeled messages from divinity, or if this is just my imagination? Mostly with channeled messages, you doubt it because you don't know for certain if it's you doing most of the work, or if you're actually getting these, divine downloads, okay? I guess I'll say it again, who cares? It works, right? Having the visions and turning them and deciphering them and interpreting them in these ways helps me to form better relationships, more allegorical and mythological and beautiful relationships with the faces of the divine that I may work with, right? And it's a little different than active imagination, because in my research, I would think that active imagination is tapping into the collective, right? It's tapping into the collective unconscious, if you will. And that's very much what the visions feel like, is that I'm tapping into this vat of unconsciousness, and maybe even subconscious, a little bit of a subconscious thing, that of the subconscious too. And see, the beautiful thing about the collective unconscious for me, in terms of active imagination, is that the divine would dwell there. So even if you were to doubt yourself and say, oh, I'm like, I don't consider myself psychic, but I consider myself to have visions and to have these profound, profound daydreams in a way that I can understand the language. And it took me a long time, but to like understand what I was looking at. But active imagination is tapping into the collective unconscious, right? But even if you would tell yourself, oh, this is just my imagination, I'm working this imagination out myself, divinity would dwell in this collective place, in this pool, if you will, of everyone, inside everyone. The divinity, the sovereignty that's inside everyone would dwell right there. That would be their domain, is in the collective unconscious. So if I'm tapping into that through my own imagination and getting these downloads and visions and channeled messages, then I would be getting them from the divine, because they're the same place, the same realm. The inner self is such a vast and nuanced being. And I believe that spirit communication would work much the same way. The spirit and divine realms would lurk in, again, all of these would exist in the same place. Learning how to decipher the messages, learning how to interpret the messages, I had to form my own kind of belief structure on the mythic language, if you will. The mythic language is the language of the imagination and a language of this realm. And it can be hard and it can be tricky to kind of interpret what you're seeing. But what I've kind of learned over the years is that the mythic language deals in symbolism, shapes, like disembodied shapes, nothing that there's like almost formlessness, and elemental associations, transpersonal. Something that could take the personal out, right? Something that could take, actually, to be honest, the language that they would use would probably take the personal and the divine out of you. And you would sit in like this cloudy place, in this foggy, mysterious place, where the language is portrayed to you through symbols and allegories and shapes, and through the sensual experiences of the elements. That's what I would think the language would be in. You go through this liminal space between inspiration and intuition. And I kind of read about this before in a couple of articles. If I can find them, I'll leave them below. But there's this like liminal space between inspiration and intuition, right? And inspiration, you can very much get inspired on a personal level. You don't always have to go to the transpersonal. And so inspiration can sit alone by itself. But when you transpose and transform yourself into this, almost transport yourself to the transpersonal realm, and that place inside inspiration, it clears away the personal and allows this kind of weird awareness to take place, right? That doesn't really involve you. It involves, like I said, the shapes, and it just kind of looks like you're in this kind of purgatory place. And then your intuition has to be unlocked. You have to be able to shift over and turn the light switch from being inspired in this weird, foggy, like high priestess realm into awakening and awareness of intuition. It's liminal only because if you allow yourself to go to, let's say, if you were to get too transpersonal or inside the domain of this foggy, mysterious, symbolic language place, you have a tendency to go too lucid, right? Which is a lot harder. And for hedge witches, we tend to do this a lot anyway, is kind of know the boundary, and we know how far we can go into the other world without sacrificing ourselves. Okay, and that's a big key, is that if you become too lucid, you're at risk of not being able to, come back. And it leads to this kind of madness within. And so you can't let yourself get too lucid. I would say that you have to keep pushing the edges of the bubble and, see what you can see in terms of the comfort zone, but then also know how to get back into this, like, allow the lucidity to take over for a little while before you can come back. And coming back is probably a lot to do with grounding, right? Like eat something, move something, dance around, put some movement in your body that really kind of centers, that really kind of unlocks your center of gravity. And that movement tends to help me with this, like my center of gravity, because I tend to be kind of flighty and floaty in the lucid space, in this space where I'm trying to interpret the language that I just was given by this channeled message. And so in the floaty, flighty space, I need to kind of pull myself back to earth. I need to tether myself in a way. And it's just like grounding. You can earth, put your feet on the ground, get back in touch with the core, your core, and your own center of gravity by moving and like doing like actual movements like this, that like squats and standing up. That would help me get back in touch with my body. The channeled messages and visions would come through meditation, would come through active imagination activities, which are like the automatics, like the automatic writing, automatic drawing, coloring. Like you can color with crayons and really get tap into some stuff there, because not only are you blanking out the brain in this kind of like, I don't really care what I'm doing, I'm just marking the paper. You can blank out the mind, but you're also adding an outlet for those shapes and that language to come forth on the page. So then once you're out of that meditative state of automatic drawing or coloring, you'd have something tangible to look at and interpret all on its own, as well as like this kind of dual nature that it would have. But mainly it would be things that you could do without thinking, that you could do that would effectively blank out your brain. I've gotten a lot of channeled messages through scrying, and basically this is another meditative state, but I'm staring into something. I'm staring into this voided space between me and this other object. Usually it's an object, right? And on this plane. So through a black mirror, through an obsidian crystal, through through a real mirror, like it doesn't matter, like you have some kind of object that you're using to scry with, to stare into. You stare into a candle flame, but there's an objectification there. So it's you as the object and that other object, and you're fighting against each other for like this language to unfurl. And so scrying is a beautiful thing to do. And any kind of inspirational activity that would unlock your sense of language, so staring at art you love, making your own art, but getting in a way that makes it a little bit more visual, right? A little bit more like you can stare at an abstract. I tend to love like primitivism and abstract expressionism for this, but something that's based on shape and color, right? And not so much plot or narrative. And it might have a little bit of that, but it's really interpretive, and you can kind of stare at it in a way that would kind of morph before your very eyes. I've gotten channeled messages from that as well. You can even look up interpretive dance and look at the way that someone has individualistically choreographed themselves doing this interpretive dance that you wouldn't understand, but they understand. And it's looking at the way that the body moves and its shape itself that allows that kind of language to unfurl as well. It's all about getting in touch with the language itself and getting in touch with how you as a person and you as an actual individual and as an object that is of this plane to decipher. How are you going to decipher? And that's the biggest thing, is getting to know yourself and how you would interpret those inspirational visuals. You can use other senses too, probably, but my favorite is the visuals. So I've learned not to doubt myself. I've learned not to doubt the visions, and I've learned not to doubt the messages, because I've come up with this kind of weird codex for praxis, like a codex praxis. And it acts as like this key to the other world. And it's not inclusive, okay? Like, it's definitely not inclusive. There's so much that the other world, for me, the other world is like the ocean. There's so much undiscovered, and there's so much that we'll never understand about the other worlds and the other realms and the other dimensions, okay? There's so much that we don't know about even our own cosmos and our own universe that we'll never understand it all. But coming up with this kind of deciphering codex will help us unlock how we're interpreting the language, the mythic language of the imagination and the mythic language of divinity and source. Just wanted to talk about that for a second. I hope that was a little bit informative. If you have any tips or tricks on how to decipher the mythic language, or venturing into the other world, or even ways in which you have been able to definitively say how you get channeled messages, if you do, like how they come about, how you generate them, if you do, I'd love to hear from you. I hope everyone's having a magical day. Much love.